Hey there. Today, we're diving into a story that changed the face of aerial combat forever. A secret breakthrough in aviation fuel that fueled the Allied victory in Europe. Imagine a fighter pushing beyond its limits, reaching speeds of nearly 500 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, powered not just by design, but by a revolutionary purple-dyed gasoline rated at a performance number of 150. But what if I told you that this chemical innovation, developed in secret laboratories, did more than just boost speeds? Could a simple change in fuel have turned the tide of a war? How did the Germans, relying on inferior synthetic fuels, fall behind so drastically? And what terrifying new capabilities did this high-octane fuel unlock for the American and British fighters? This wasn't just about numbers. This was a chemical arms race, where octane ratings and engine performance transformed the skies into a battlefield of technological supremacy. How did scientists manage to produce such a powerful fuel, and what hidden costs came with it? How did this fuel help intercept deadly V-1 flying bombs and outpace the fastest German fighters? And most astonishingly, how did a mysterious purple liquid become a weapon more powerful than any missile or machine gun? The key question is, could the true power of victory lie not only in aircraft or tactics but in the secret chemistry of the fuel that powered them? We'll uncover how a scientific breakthrough in high-octane aviation gasoline, crafted under the radar, turned ordinary fighters into unstoppable speed demons, changing the course of history. And right now, the most incredible part begins. The story of how this revolutionary fuel was developed, tested, and ultimately unleashed into the skies over Europe. Let's start at the very beginning. In the early months of 1944, over the skies of Dayton, Ohio, a pivotal moment in aviation history was quietly unfolding. A skilled test pilot, with a steady hand and unwavering focus, carefully adjusted the throttle of a P-51 Mustang, a renowned American fighter aircraft already celebrated for its agility and high-altitude capabilities. This time, however, he was pushing well beyond the typical operational limits, venturing past the standard war emergency power setting, seeking to unlock untapped performance potential. As he applied full throttle, the engine roared fiercely, responding with an impressive surge as the boost pressure gauge climbed rapidly to 75 inches of mercury, a feat made possible by a groundbreaking, experimental aviation fuel designated simply as Grade 150. The aircraft's airspeed indicator, a vital instrument measuring how fast it sliced through the surrounding air, began steadily climbing past figures that previously represented the uppermost boundaries encountered by Allied fighters. At an altitude of 25,000 feet, the Mustang was accelerating at an astonishing pace, reaching speeds of approximately 448 miles per hour. From the ground, the engineers monitoring the progress exchanged knowing glances, their expressions hinting at the significance of what was unfolding. The pilot's radio crackled with updates, each message underscoring that this was no mere incremental gain, no small improvement on past performance. This was something much more profound, a true revolution in aerial combat capability, fueled not by new aircraft designs or tactical doctrines but by a chemical breakthrough. A new type of aviation gasoline, dyed purple for quick identification, that conferred a dramatic performance advantage. This chemical advantage was rooted in the use of a revolutionary fuel, one that would challenge and ultimately unsettle the prevailing assumptions held by the German Luftwaffe regarding the limits of American fighters. The implications extended far beyond mere numbers. They threatened to redefine the very dynamics of air superiority in the war's European theater. What the Germans failed to yet grasp was that American and British scientists specializing in petroleum chemistry had achieved what the Third Reich's synthetic fuel program could never match: a high-octane aviation fuel rated at a performance number of 150. This rating was a measure of the fuel's ability to withstand compression without detonating prematurely, a key factor in maximizing engine power and aircraft performance. Prior to this breakthrough, German fighters struggled with inferior fuel grades, primarily B4 fuel rated at a mere 91 octane and, in some cases, C3 fuel barely reaching the performance level of the Allied 130 grade. In contrast, American refineries had begun producing aviation gasoline with a performance number soaring to 150, a quantum leap that opened new horizons of speed and altitude. The impact was staggering. A P-51 Mustang operating on the standard 130 grade fuel could attain an approximate speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Yet, when fueled with the newly developed 150 grade, the same aircraft, flown by the same pilot at the same altitude, could surpass speeds of 448 miles per hour, gaining an almost 10% advantage that could decisively influence aerial engagements. This newfound performance transformed the tactical landscape. German pilots, already recognizing the Mustang's long-range capabilities and superior high-altitude performance, would soon discover that their adversaries had fundamentally altered the game. The German Messerschmitt Bf 109G, which represented the frontline fighter of the Luftwaffe in early 1944, was capable of reaching a maximum speed of approximately 400 miles per hour at high altitude, a figure that, although impressive, was now eclipsed by the upgraded American fighters operating on grade 150 fuel. Similarly, the Focke-Wulf Fw 190A, another formidable German fighter, could attain speeds near 408 miles per hour under optimal conditions. When engaging with Mustangs powered by standard grade 130 fuel, German pilots could, at best, attempt to match or even outmaneuver their American counterparts under favorable circumstances. However, the moment they faced Mustangs fueled with grade 150, their aircraft were at a clear disadvantage, an inherent deficit that no amount of pilot flying skill, tactical ingenuity, or daring maneuvering could entirely compensate for. This difference in performance was not merely marginal, it was a fundamental shift that threatened to undermine German tactical strategies and aerial dominance. The story of how such a revolutionary advantage in fuel technology was achieved begins not with the chaos and violence of war but rather in the meticulous, forward-thinking work of scientists working in peacetime laboratories. These petroleum chemists understood that octane rating was a measure of how much an air-fuel mixture could be compressed before spontaneously combusting, detonating prematurely, which compromised engine performance. Higher octane levels meant that engines could operate at greater compression ratios, unlocking more power from each combustion cycle, and consequently enabling aircraft to fly faster, higher, and farther. Producing high-octane aviation fuel at an industrial scale, however, proved to be an enormously complex scientific and engineering challenge. It required initially, the fuel used in both commercial aviation and early military training aircraft was adequate for their intended purposes, however, it was woefully inadequate when it came to powering high-performance combat aircraft. As the threat from enemy fighters and bombers intensified, it became clear that superior engine performance could be a decisive factor in aerial battles. Recognizing this, the British, who were desperate to gain any advantage they could against the numerically superior Luftwaffe, turned to a strategic partnership with American oil companies. This collaboration aimed to develop a higher-grade fuel, specifically, one with 100-octane rating, which could significantly boost aircraft performance. The new, higher-octane fuel became available just in time for the critical Battle of Britain, and its impact was quickly felt on the battlefield. The effects of this development were immediately noticeable and quite dramatic. British fighters like the Spitfire and the Hurricane, which had previously been limited in their speed and agility by the lower octane fuel, suddenly gained a substantial boost. At altitude, these aircraft could now reach speeds that were 30 to 40 miles per hour faster. Additionally, their climb rates improved markedly, with some aircraft able to ascend an extra 500 to 1,000 feet per minute. German pilots, who had enjoyed certain performance advantages thanks to their use of fuels with octane ratings ranging from 91 to 100, suddenly found themselves on more equal footing with their adversaries. This technological leap temporarily leveled the playing field and showcased how critical fuel quality was in aerial combat. Building on this progress, engineers and scientists continued to push the boundaries of aviation fuel performance. The development of a fuel with a rating of 130 octane represented another significant leap forward in jet propulsion technology. This advanced fuel, when used with rich mixture settings, became the backbone of Allied air power throughout the year 1943. It powered the legendary Merlin engines in both the Spitfire and the Mustang fighters, provided the necessary performance for the Allison engines in the formidable P-38 Lightning fighters, and fueled the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2880 radial engines employed in the P-47 Thunderbolt. The rapid scaling of production was driven by the efforts of pioneering aviation fuel advocate General James Doolittle, a military leader who dedicated himself in the 1930s to convincing both the military establishment and oil industry leaders of the importance of investing in high-octane fuel development. Under his leadership, a network of 17 Allied refineries emerged by 1943, producing high-octane aviation gasoline through a cutting-edge catalytic cracking process. This process, perfected by Eugene Hudry, a French immigrant engineer, revolutionized fuel production by enabling more efficient conversion of petroleum into high-octane fuels. The United States alone was producing millions of gallons of this advanced aviation fuel monthly, enough to supply the vast bomber fleets launched against Germany and the increasingly formidable fighter escort forces. In stark contrast, German fuel production faced significant bottlenecks. Their reliance on synthetic fuel derived from coal meant that their capacity was far more limited and less efficient. The coal-to-fuel conversion process, although technically sound, was slow, resource-intensive, and unable to keep pace with Allied production. As a result, most German fighters operated on B4 fuel, which was rated at approximately 91 octane on the lean mixture scale, thus limiting their engine performance. Germany's premium grade, known as C3, was primarily used in the BMW 801-powered Focke-Wulf Fw 190 fighters and certain variants of the Messerschmitt aircraft. This fuel was roughly equivalent to the Allied 130 grade fuel but was available only in limited quantities due to production constraints. By the year 1944, about two-thirds of German aviation fuel was of the C3 grade, but even that represented only a small fraction of the total fuel produced by the Allies. The disparity in fuel quality and availability contributed significantly to the overall imbalance in air power. To truly understand the importance of fuel performance, one must grasp the fundamental principles governing internal combustion engines. Octane ratings serve as a measure of a fuel's resistance to detonation, an uncontrolled, destructive form of ignition. During engine operation, the piston compresses the air-fuel mixture during the compression stroke, which causes a dramatic increase in temperature and pressure within the cylinder. If the fuel's octane rating is too low, it can spontaneously ignite before the spark plug fires, resulting in detonation. This phenomenon produces shock waves that can severely damage or destroy engine components. Conversely, higher octane fuels are capable of withstanding greater compression without igniting prematurely, thereby enabling engines to operate at higher power settings and with more aggressive tuning. Ultimately, the development and refinement of high-octane aviation fuels proved to be a crucial technological advance in the aviation war effort. By allowing aircraft engines to reach higher speeds, climb more rapidly, and operate more reliably at high altitudes, these fuels significantly enhanced combat effectiveness. The substantial increase in fuel performance not only contributed to the NTLY catch up or engage effectively. They recognized that simply deploying more fighters or increasing their numbers would not suffice if these aircraft could not outrun or outmaneuver the enemy fighters. Consequently, the focus shifted toward enhancing the performance of the existing aircraft, especially the P-51 Mustang, which had already proven its worth as an effective escort. The breakthrough in achieving this goal came through the development of a high-performance fuel, designated as 150 grade, which significantly boosted the aircraft's power output without requiring any structural modifications to the planes. To understand the significance of this advancement, it's essential to know that octane ratings, by their very definition, do not surpass the value of 100. This is because 100-octane fuel signifies a fuel with a detonation resistance matching that of pure iso-octane, which serves as the standard reference. Performance numbers, however, quantify a fuel's ability to handle compression beyond what octane ratings alone can indicate. For example, a fuel with a performance number of 150 implies that it can withstand 50% more compression before detonating when compared to pure iso-octane. Creating such a highly resistant fuel was no trivial task. It involved adding anti-knock compounds, mainly tetraethylide, and carefully blending aromatic hydrocarbons like toluene and xylene into the base gasoline. During the years of 1942 and 1943, extensive testing was conducted by British fuel chemists at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. They experimented with numerous blend combinations to find the optimal balance among anti-knock performance, energy content, and ease of manufacture. Meanwhile, American researchers based at Wright Field engaged in parallel efforts, sharing their findings with their British counterparts. By early 1943, both nations managed to produce experimental batches of what they called the 150 grade fuel. The terminology used to describe this fuel, however, was somewhat misleading. The term, 150 grade, suggested an octane rating of 150, which was chemically impossible because octane ratings are capped at 100. In reality, what this designation indicated was a fuel with a performance number of 150 on a richer mixture scale, meaning it could be compressed more significantly, and a standard octane rating of 100 on a leaner mixture scale. To facilitate easy identification, the fuel was dyed purple and went through rigorous testing throughout 1943. The results of these tests were highly encouraging and went beyond expectations. Engines such as the Merlin, used extensively in Allied aircraft, showed remarkable performance improvements when running on the 150 grade fuel. For instance, Merlin engines powering the P-51 Mustang could sustain manifold pressure readings of 75 inches of mercury compared to only 67 inches when operating on the standard 130 grade fuel. These enhanced pressures directly translated into increased horsepower, which was crucial in improving aircraft performance. Specifically, the Packard Merlin V16507 engine, which powered the legendary P-51 Mustang, produced around 1,490 horsepower at standard military power when fueled with the 130 grade fuel. In contrast, When powered by the same engine running on the upgraded 150 grade fuel at wartime emergency power settings, the engine boosted its output to approximately 1,720 horsepower in the P-51B model equipped with the V16503 Merlin variant. This power increase was substantial enough to push the aircraft's total output close to about 1,600 horsepower, significantly enhancing its combat capabilities. Comprehensive flight testing at Wright Field further confirmed that these performance enhancements were not just theoretical but practically observable across all flight regimes. The maximum speed of the aircraft increased by roughly 25 to 30 miles per hour at altitude, which was a crucial advantage for both defensive and offensive operations. Additionally, the climb rate improved by several hundred feet per minute, allowing pilots to reach strategic altitudes more rapidly and improve their situational advantage in combat situations. One of the most notable aspects of this development was that all these performance gains were achieved without any modifications to the airplane's design or structure. The same Mustang, flown on consecutive days using different types of fuel, first on the standard 130 grade and then on the upgraded 150 grade, became noticeably faster and more capable simply because of the superior fuel flowing through its fuel lines. This simple yet revolutionary change provided a significant tactical advantage, especially in the critical phases of escort missions deep into enemy territory. Given these promising results, the decision was made in early 1944 to introduce the use of the 150 grade fuel into operational fighter squadrons. The timing of this rollout was carefully considered, influenced by the pressing needs of the Allied forces. The 8th Air Force, based in England and tasked with conducting daylight strategic bombing campaigns deep into Nazi-held Germany, was suffering increasingly unsustainable losses. Despite the arrival of the first P-51 Mustangs in December of 1943, German fighter units continued to inflict heavy casualties on American bomber formations. The American military strategists recognized that what was needed was not merely an escort in the twilight years of World War II. The strategic landscape was constantly shifting, with new tactics and technologies emerging to give one side or the other an advantage. Among these innovations was a specially formulated grade of aviation fuel that promised to elevate the performance of Allied fighters, particularly the legendary North American P-51 Mustangs. Recognized for its capacity to extend range and boost speed, this advanced fuel quickly became a vital asset in the ongoing aerial battles that raged across Europe. In May of 1944, the first operational shipments of this refined fuel, designated as the 150 grade, were dispatched to England. The distribution of this resource was a meticulously organized process, governed by strict logistical controls. It was not an indiscriminate release. Instead, only selected fighter groups received this enhanced fuel initially. The United States Army Air Force's 8th Air Force took a cautious approach, allocating the new fuel to specific squadrons. This selective deployment served a dual purpose: to ensure the efficient management of supplies and to establish a reliable basis for evaluating the impact of the fuel on combat performance. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force, which had already been at the forefront of early aviation fuel testing and experimentation, also began equipping some of its fighter squadrons with the new, high-grade fuel. The priority was given to units engaged in high-speed interception missions, especially those tasked with confronting the recently introduced German V-1 flying bombs. These deadly missiles, which started terrorizing London and southeastern England in June of 1944, presented a new challenge. The V-1 cruised through the air at approximately 400 miles per hour at low altitude, making interception a formidable task. To effectively engage these flying bombs, fighters needed to match or surpass their speed at sea level, where air density diminished aircraft performance. The existing fighters, such as the Hawker Tempest and the Spitfire Mark 14, struggled to keep pace. Their maximum speeds were barely sufficient to catch the V-1s, which often remained elusive. The standard P-51 Mustangs, running on regular fuel, were similarly marginal in intercepting these fast-moving targets. However, when fueled with the new 150 grade fuel, Mustangs gained enough additional speed margin to reliably close the gap and intercept the V-1s. The first clear demonstration of this capability occurred on June 18, 1944, when Major R.E. Turner of the 356th Fighter Squadron successfully destroyed a V-1 flying bomb. He achieved this by employing a specialized technique, using the wingtip of his P-51 to strike the V-1, causing it to veer off course and crash. This maneuver, requiring extraordinary precision and tremendous speed, involved positioning the Mustang's wingtip within approximately 6 inches of the V-1's wing surface. The airflow then exploited this proximity, causing the flying bomb to roll off course and spiral downwards. The successful application of this tactic marked a significant milestone in aerial combat, demonstrating the tangible benefits of the improved fuel. Over the course of the campaign, American pilots performed this wingtip technique at least 16 times, effectively turning the new fuel into a weapon capable of tackling the most dangerous targets. As the Normandy invasion approached, these advancements had an even more profound impact. Fighter groups of the 8th Air Force, tasked with establishing air supremacy over the invasion beaches, engaged in combat air patrols and escorted bomber formations using the enhanced fuel. Encounter reports from German fighter pilots started to reveal a startling new reality. American Mustangs, powered by the 150 grade fuel, were performing at levels previously thought unattainable. German pilots claimed that these fighters were capable of outrunning and outmaneuvering their interceptors in ways that defied earlier experience. Luftwaffe intelligence officers initially dismissed these reports as mere pilot exaggeration or the result of fatigue, a common assumption given the relentless stress and losses faced by German aviation units. They believed that exhausted pilots, overwhelmed by combat and numerical superiority of Allied forces, might overstate the capabilities of the American fighters. It was argued that the pilots' reports of superior performance were simply the product of stress-induced perceptions rather than actual technological or performance gains. This assessment, however, was fundamentally flawed. The true extent of the improvement would only become apparent after the war concluded. Among the German aces who had fought extensively on the Eastern Front was a veteran named Garral, credited with claiming over 275 victories, mostly achieved during fierce battles against Soviet forces. In 1944, Garral was deployed in combat missions over Germany, engaging with American fighters, including the now legendary Mustangs. Decades after the conflict, during interviews conducted in the 1970s and the early 1980s, Garral recounted his experiences with these late war fighters. He described being utterly shocked by their overwhelming performance during the final year of the war, noting that the American fighters seemed to possess an almost supernatural level of speed and agility compared to earlier encounters. Garral's observations offered a rare glimpse into how technological during subsequent test flights of captured enemy aircraft, American pilots meticulously examined and evaluated models such as the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning. Of these, the P-51 Mustang left a particularly lasting impression, primarily due to its exceptional performance characteristics. It stood out vividly in terms of its remarkable speed, impressive rate of climb, and outstanding capability to operate effectively at high altitudes. These attributes contributed significantly to the aircraft's reputation as a dominant force in the skies, especially during the later stages of the war. What many German pilots and their compatriots did not fully realize during their encounters in combat was that they were facing a fighter aircraft whose performance had been significantly enhanced through chemical means. The Mustang they faced had been driven beyond the limits originally envisioned by its designers and engineers. Its engines were operated at power settings far exceeding the specifications under which the aircraft was initially built, settings that the original engineers of the Mustang could not have anticipated or approved. The engine at the heart of this performance boost was the Rolls-Royce Merlin, an engineering marvel designed with meticulous attention to the thermal limits, load-bearing capacities, and detonation margins necessary for reliable high-performance operation. Under license, the Packard Motor Car Company produced the Merlin engine in the United States, ensuring that its critical components and performance standards were maintained. However, the true breakthrough came with the introduction of a special grade of fuel, designated as 150 octane, or more accurately, 150 grade fuel, which had a significant impact on engine performance. This advanced fuel was revolutionary because it enabled pilots to operate their engines at increased boost pressures and higher power settings without suffering catastrophic engine damage caused by knocking or detonation. Normally, engines running at elevated boost levels risked knocking, an uncontrolled combustion phenomenon that could quickly lead to engine failure. The 150 grade fuel allowed engines to be pushed to these extremes safely, thus unlocking performance gains that had previously been unattainable with standard fuels. The science behind this capability involved highly complex chemical interactions within the engine's combustion chamber, where fuel molecules, air molecules, heat, and pressure all interacted during combustion. The key chemical additive responsible was tetraethyl lead, which acted as an anti-knock agent. It worked by disrupting the chain reactions in the fuel-air mixture that often initiated spontaneous ignition, thereby providing a buffering effect that prevented knocking at higher pressures. Nevertheless, this chemical enhancement was not without serious downsides. Tetraethyl lead was inherently toxic, necessitating careful and cautious handling by ground crews to prevent health hazards. Additionally, its use resulted in the deposition of lead residues on the spark plugs, valves, and cylinder walls, which increased the frequency and difficulty of maintenance tasks. The high lead content in the 150 grade fuel accelerated these issues, making engine upkeep more demanding and labor-intensive. Fighter squadrons that adopted the new fuel quickly noticed the repercussions. Spark plugs fouled more rapidly, and the buildup of deposits on engine components led to increased cylinder wear. Consequently, American maintenance teams responded swiftly and effectively. The intervals for replacing spark plugs were shortened significantly, and routine cylinder inspections became more frequent. Engine overhaul schedules were adjusted accordingly, ensuring that the aircraft maintained optimal performance. Despite these increased maintenance efforts, the military acknowledged that the performance gains achieved with the high-octane fuel were well worth the additional logistical challenges and resource commitments. For pilots, adapting to the use of 150 grade fuel meant significant adjustments in operating procedures. The most crucial change was the need to carefully manage engine power settings, particularly the manifold pressure. With the fuel allowing higher boost pressures, pilots had to be vigilant to avoid overboosting, especially at lower altitudes where the air density is greatest. Overboosting could lead to engine damage or failure, so pilots had to develop disciplined habits to stay within safe operational limits. Perhaps most critically, pilots learned that managing fuel consumption became equally important as managing power. While the 150 grade fuel provided a substantial boost in engine power output, exploiting this advantage required judicious use of throttle settings. Running engines at maximum boost and power settings consumed fuel at an alarmingly rapid rate, which was a serious concern during long-range escort missions, such as those escorting bombers to Berlin and back, where fuel reserves were already stretched thin. To maximize operational range and efficiency, pilots had to practice precise fuel management, balancing the need for maximum power during combat or intercepts with the necessity of conserving fuel during cruising segments. Historical combat reports from the summer and autumn of their 40th year of the war vividly document the transformative impact of these technological and procedural adjustments. American fighter groups armed with the new, high-octane fuel consistently reported higher ratios of victories to losses, reflecting their increased effectiveness in dogfights and interception missions. They gained a decisive advantage over German fighters, which previously had been able to execute swift, slashing attacks and then disappear into the skies, evading pursuers with relative ease. However, after the introduction of the high-performance fuel, German fighters found themselves less capable of outrunning the 357th Fighter Group, an esteemed unit operating under the umbrella of Operation Frantic missions aimed at coordinating and supporting Allied efforts in Eastern Europe, found itself confronting German fighters during these daring sorties to Soviet airbases. One of their pilots, flying a formidable P-51 Mustang affectionately named Hell's Bells, encountered an enemy aircraft over the tumultuous skies of Eastern Europe, setting the stage for a memorable aerial engagement. Equipped with a full tank of 150-octane fuel, a high-octane fuel that would later prove crucial in the evolving air combat landscape, pilot Neylan found himself face to face with a Messerschmitt Bf 109, a legendary German fighter flown by a pilot known as Schack. As the two aircraft clashed amidst the clouds, Neylan quickly realized that his Mustang's superior speed and agility afforded him a distinct advantage. In a swift and decisive move, he closed the distance with remarkable speed, closing in on Schack's aircraft with relentless determination. Without hesitation, Neylan unleashed a burst of machine gun fire that struck the Bf 109, causing damage to its cooling system and impairing its ability to stay airborne effectively. By the time the combat concluded, Neylan's aircraft was low on both fuel and ammunition, common after intense dogfights that drained resources rapidly. Recognizing the situation, Neylan broke off pursuit, choosing to disengage before risking an emergency landing with limited resources. In a gesture of sportsmanship, he waved farewell to the German pilot, an act of mutual respect, before returning to his escort duties, ensuring the safety of the Allied bomber formations. Schack, severely crippled, managed to make a belly landing near German lines, surviving the encounter but left pondering the outcome. For 4 decades, Schack wondered why the American pilot had not pressed his advantage and finished him off, never realizing that Neylan's intentions had been guided by a cautious belief, believing that he had only inflicted damage rather than delivering a lethal blow. Decades later, the stories of the two pilots would converge when historians facilitated a reunion in Germany, allowing Schack to meet the American flyer he had engaged. During their conversation, Schack expressed his admiration, acknowledging that the Mustang flown by Neylan had demonstrated performance capabilities that surpassed anything he had encountered before. The rapid closing speeds, combined with the raw power evident during their combat, stood out starkly against the backdrop of previous aerial encounters with Allied fighters. Schack's recognition underscored just how exceptional the American fighter's performance had been, leaving a lasting impression on the veteran German pilot. The impact of such encounters extended beyond individual pilots, resonating deeply within the Luftwaffe's strategic and psychological framework. Already facing the daunting challenge of being vastly outnumbered and confronting the might of Allied air forces with superior numbers, German pilots now also grappled with the unnerving realization that American fighters possessed performance margins that seemed effectively unlimited. The agility, speed, and endurance of the P-51 Mustangs made traditional tactics less viable, forcing German pilots to reconsider their options. They could attempt mass attacks, hoping that overwhelming numbers might compensate for their disadvantages, or they could choose to avoid engagement altogether, conserving their aircraft and pilots for future, more favorable opportunities. However, engaging capable and increasingly confident American pilots often resulted in disastrous outcomes, as the Mustangs, flown by pilots who had grown more aggressive and self-assured, proved difficult to evade or outmaneuver. These fighters were faster, more maneuverable, and equipped with a range of tactics that made them formidable opponents in dogfights. The psychological toll on Luftwaffe pilots was profound. The mere sight of dozens of P-51s over German skies was enough to undermine morale, fueling fears that the days of air superiority were slipping away. The renowned Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, famously remarked upon witnessing the presence of P-51 Mustangs over Berlin that he recognized a clear sign of the war's impending end. His statement reflected a deep understanding of the strategic crisis facing Germany, with the long-range capabilities of the Mustangs enabling them to strike deep into German heartland. No location within the borders of the Reich was truly safe from daylight bombing raids. This technological edge and tactical flexibility signaled a turning point, leaving German strategic planners increasingly desperate. Adding to the growing crisis was the introduction of superior fuel in mid-1944, which further amplified the challenges faced by the Luftwaffe. By this stage in the war, German technical intelligence teams had managed to acquire samples of Allied aviation gasoline, specifically the high-octane 150 grade, from either captured drop tanks or wrecked aircraft. These samples were meticulously analyzed by the German chemists, who confirmed troubling suspicions. The Americans had developed a type of aviation gasoline with performance characteristics that far exceeded what German synthetic fuel plants could manufacture. Some reports suggested that late-war German C3 fuel was approaching performance levels comparable to the American 150-octane fuel. However, production was limited, and the quality of this German during the early phases of deployment. Pilots assigned to operational units often had surprisingly minimal flying experience, especially when compared to their American counterparts, whose newcomers typically accumulated several hundred hours of flying before being thrust into combat situations. This disparity in training and experience played a significant role in the overall effectiveness and resilience of the respective air forces. In the period stretching from January to May of 1944, before the widespread adoption and use of a new, higher-octane type of aviation fuel known as Grade 150, American bomber crews encountered a sobering reality. They endured loss rates ranging roughly from 3 to 6% per mission. Though these losses were severe, they remained within a tolerable threshold, allowing the strategic bombing campaigns to continue, albeit with considerable costs and sacrifices. Following the introduction of this high-grade fuel and the achievement of clear air superiority, the losses sustained per mission dramatically declined. Between June and December of that same year, the rate of bomber losses fell to below 2% per operation, marking a significant improvement in operational safety and survivability. This period also saw a dramatic surge in aerial victories, with American P-51 fighter groups embedded within the 8th, 9th, and 15th Air Forces claiming nearly 4,950 German aircraft destroyed in combat engagements spanning from late 1943 to May of 1945. Notably, the vast majority of these victories occurred after June of 1944, underscoring the impact of technological and tactical advancements. The German Luftwaffe, which had entered 1944 with a considerable cadre of experienced pilots despite suffering heavy losses on the Eastern Front, found itself systematically dismantled over the course of that year. The relentless attrition and decreasing quality of the German pilot force rendered their defensive capabilities increasingly ineffective. By the time of the Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, only 2 Luftwaffe aircraft could be observed over the beaches. Although the Luftwaffe still retained thousands of fighters in reserve, they lacked the crucial elements necessary for effective combat: sufficient fuel supplies, well-trained pilots, and the tactical flexibility to employ their remaining aircraft effectively. A detailed examination of the technical specifications of the new Grade 150 fuel reveals crucial insights into its performance and operational significance. This fuel had a lean mixture octane rating of 100, meaning it could resist engine knocking or detonation as effectively as pure iso-octane, even when engines were operating at cruising power settings. On the other hand, its rich mixture performance number of 150 indicated that it could endure 50% more compression pressure than iso-octane at maximum engine power, allowing aircraft to cruise efficiently over long distances at lower power settings and then switch to richer mixtures for combat at higher power levels. This fuel's unique combination of properties gave pilots confidence that their engines would not prematurely detonate, even under extreme boost pressures required for combat maneuvers. However, handling the fuel demanded extra caution due to its high tetraethyl lead content. Ground crews had to wear protective gear during refueling operations, and any spills had to be rapidly cleaned up to prevent lead poisoning among personnel. Fuel trucks and storage tanks were meticulously marked to avoid accidental mixing of different fuel grades, thus safeguarding engine performance and safety. Despite these precautions, the overall safety record associated with the handling and use of high-octane fuel was impressively good, with industrial accidents remaining a rare occurrence. Transitioning to this new fuel type within operational squadrons involved comprehensive pilot training programs, wherein personnel received detailed briefings on the properties of the fuel and updated engine operation procedures. These upgrades included raising the manifold pressure limits to exploit the higher octane rating and specifying clear operational guidelines for when and how to apply maximum power settings during combat and routine flight. Importantly, the transition to Grade 150 fuel did not necessitate modifications to the aircraft themselves. The engines, fuel delivery systems, and all associated components were fully compatible with both the traditional and the new high-octane fuels, simplifying logistics and operational planning across the Allied forces. The scale of industrial mobilization necessary to sustain this effort is underscored by the impressive production statistics. Between May of 1944 and April of 1945, the 8th Air Force alone consumed in excess of 53 million gallons of Grade 150 fuel. When considering the combined output of all Allied refineries engaged in this massive logistical undertaking, total fuel production during this period likely surpassed 200 million gallons. Each gallon of fuel required a complex infrastructure of refining facilities, chemical additives, and quality control measures to ensure performance standards and safety, exemplifying a wartime industrial effort of unprecedented magnitude and sophistication. In the complex and highly coordinated effort to secure victory over Nazi Germany, the production, transportation, and deployment of crucial materials played an indispensable role. Among these, the handling of toxic tetraethyl lead, a vital additive for high-octane aviation gasoline, was meticulously managed from the point of manufacture through rigorous quality control tests, ensuring the fuel's purity and performance. This specialized fuel was then carefully transported across the Atlantic to Europe, often stored in highly secure facilities to prevent theft, sabotage, or contamination. From these secure storage sites, it was distributed meticulously to dozens of airfields across the continent, supporting the operational needs of Allied air forces engaged in relentless combat. The industrial capacity of the United States in the year 1944 appeared almost miraculous in its breadth and efficiency. American factories churned out aircraft at an unprecedented rate, bomber productions numbering in the thousands, while fighter planes were produced in the tens of thousands. Shipyards, operating with extraordinary speed, launched Liberty ships faster than German U-boats could sink them, effectively maintaining the vital supply lines and logistical network essential for sustained military operations. Meanwhile, the nation's oil refineries produced aviation gasoline in quantities that surpassed Germany's total output of all grades of fuel, highlighting the sheer scale and technological prowess of American industry during this critical period. This impressive industrial output was the result of decades of deliberate development, extensive natural resource exploitation, and a homeland shielded from enemy bombers, which allowed for uninterrupted manufacturing. Additionally, the entire workforce contributed significantly, with millions of women taking up factory jobs to bolster the war effort, filling roles traditionally held by men, and demonstrating the nation's adaptable and resilient spirit. The Royal Air Force, operating over Europe, extensively used a special grade of fuel, designated as 150 grade, in their fighter operations to enhance performance and reliability. Priority was given to British squadrons flying iconic aircraft such as the Spitfire Mark 14, Tempest V, and the Mustang Mark III and IV, ensuring they received this advanced fuel for their missions. RAF pilots reported performance improvements comparable to those experienced by their American counterparts, confirming the fuel's effectiveness. The Tempest, already recognized as one of the fastest piston-engine fighters in the Allied fleet, became even more formidable with the inclusion of this high-octane fuel. These modifications translated into tangible battlefield advantages. During the intense campaign against the V-1 flying bombs, Tempest squadrons achieved extraordinary success. Between the months of June and September of 1944, RAF Unit No. 150 Wing Tempests shot down a staggering 638 V-1s, with only 3 squadron claiming over 300 of those kills. Squadron leader Joseph Bry earned a remarkable 59 V-1 kills, becoming a notable figure in the campaign. Belgian squadron leader Remy van Lierde destroyed 44 V-1s, while wing commander Roland Bymont achieved 31 victories. Among the most successful interceptors of this period, besides the Tempest, were the Mosquito with over 623 victories, the Spitfire Mark 14 with 303, and the Mustang with 232. The performance advantage conferred by the 150 grade fuel proved invaluable across all operational roles. Its beneficial effects on combat efficacy were repeatedly validated through late 1944 and early 1945, as Allied aircraft demonstrated increased victory claims and experienced fewer losses. By March of 1945, nearly every P-51 Mustang unit had transitioned to using this superior fuel, solidifying its status as a decisive factor in aerial combat. Operational reports from this period overwhelmingly reflected the impact of the improved fuel quality. German fighters, Unable to match the enhanced capabilities of their Allied counterparts, seldom challenged formations effectively. When they did engage, they typically faced heavy losses. By April of the same year, missions over Germany often encountered no opposition at all, signaling a decisive shift in air superiority. The Luftwaffe had been effectively decimated, destroyed by a combination of attrition, fuel shortages, and the systematic elimination of experienced pilots who could no longer be replaced. On the 8th of May, 1945, Germany officially surrendered, bringing an end to the European Air War. This victory was characterized by total Allied air supremacy, a dominance achieved through multiple factors, including the long-range capabilities of the P-51 Mustangs. Their ability to reach distant targets, combined with excellent pilot training, overwhelming numerical superiority of Allied forces, and, critically, the technological advantage provided by the high-octane, purple-dyed gasoline, played crucial roles. This specially formulated fuel transformed capable fighters into exceptional combat machines. It infused pilots with confidence, knowing their aircraft could perform at peak levels, and embodied the technological and industrial might of the Allied nations. Those that could outproduce, out-innovate, and ultimately outlast their opponents. Speed, in aerial combat, mattered immensely. A faster fighter could dictate the terms of engagement, choosing when and how to strike, making every advantage count in the relentless pursuit of victory. The skies over Europe had become a battleground where technological and industrial superiority played a decisive role. The element that often tipped the scales was not only the raw number of aircraft or soldiers but the quality and reliability of the fuel powering these machines. As the war dragged into its final months, the stark disparity between the Allied and German war efforts became increasingly evident, a disparity rooted in one crucial factor: fuel. Allied air forces, particularly those of the United States and Britain, enjoyed a significant tactical advantage thanks to their ability to sustain multiple combat missions each day. This relentless tempo was made possible primarily by the abundance of fuel, which limited neither endurance nor operational frequency. Their pilots flew with confidence, knowing that their aircraft had ample reserves, could operate at high speeds, and that they could pursue aggressive tactics without the constant worry of fuel exhaustion. This operational freedom allowed Allied fighters to maintain continuous patrols, respond swiftly to emerging threats, and execute missions with a level of aggressiveness that often overwhelmed their opponents. In contrast, German fighters faced a markedly different reality. Due to severe fuel shortages, their operational tempo was heavily constrained. The Luftwaffe's pilots frequently found themselves grounded, not because of mechanical failure or enemy action, but simply because there was not enough fuel to keep their aircraft in the air. When they did fly, they operated under rigid fuel conservation protocols, which restricted their ability to engage fully in combat or to pursue fleeing enemies. Such limitations meant that German pilots had to choose their moments carefully, flying only when the strategic advantage was clear and conserving fuel during less critical times. Every sortie became a gamble, not just against enemy fighters or anti-aircraft fire, but against the very substance necessary to keep their aircraft operational. This dependency on limited fuel supplies profoundly affected the tactical and strategic options available to German pilots. If a German fighter burned too much fuel during a skirmish, it might find itself incapable of returning to base, forced to make a forced landing or to descend rapidly into a retreat. Meanwhile, Allied pilots continued to operate with a confidence rooted in their material superiority, knowing they had sufficient fuel to sustain their operations and to escape if needed. This disparity gave Allied pilots the freedom to adopt more aggressive tactics, to push their aircraft to the limit, and to achieve better combat results with a higher likelihood of survival. At the heart of this conflict over fuel was not merely the physical quantity but the quality, specifically, the properties of the fuel itself. The pursuit of approximately 150-grade fuel became a story about the immense industrial effort necessary to sustain the Allied war machine. Victory in the air was increasingly dictated by the capacity of industry not only to produce large quantities of aircraft but also to develop better, more efficient fuels that could keep pace with technological advancements. Superior fuel, achieved through advanced chemical formulations, allowed Allied fighters to perform beyond the initial expectations based on aircraft design alone. The production of this high-grade fuel was a testament to the extraordinary industrial capabilities of the Allied nations. Chemists and engineers working tirelessly in laboratories and refineries refined crude oil into specialized formulations, optimizing octane ratings and manifold pressures that enhanced engine performance. Their work, though detached from the chaos of combat, directly impacted the outcome of battles above Europe. Every time a P-51 Mustang pilot pushed his throttle forward and felt the surge of power that German fighters could not match, it was a testament to the ingenuity and industrial effort invested in creating that fuel. German military planners had initially believed that American fighters would perform within predictable limits, based on aircraft engineering and standard fuel capabilities. They assumed that Allied aircraft performance could be accurately anticipated and countered. However, this proved to be a gross miscalculation. The American and British fuel industries had developed a system so expansive and sophisticated that it allowed their fighters to exceed expectations continuously. The infrastructure was so robust that it provided an almost unbeatable advantage, enabling American fighters to sustain high performance levels in combat far beyond what the Germans had forecasted. By the spring of the year 1945, this disparity in industrial and material capacity had become even more pronounced. The skies over Europe had essentially become a theater where technological and industrial superiority determined the outcome of air battles. The ability of the Allies not just to produce more aircraft but to produce aircraft powered by superior fuel, supported by an unparalleled industrial base, was shaping the final phase of the air war. Those who controlled the fuel, and by extension the skies, held the key to victory, an advantage that ultimately proved insurmountable for the German Luftwaffe. As the Allied forces relentlessly advanced into Germany from both eastern and western fronts, the once formidable Luftwaffe had largely disintegrated as a cohesive and effective fighting entity. What remained of the German Air Force consisted of a handful of units still capable of flying sorties, but even these operations were often hampered by critically low fuel supplies, leaving pilots with barely enough gasoline to complete a single mission before being forced to land or retreat. The advent of jet fighters, particularly the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262, marked a significant leap forward in aerial combat technology. However, their impact was limited by a series of systemic issues. They arrived too late in the war, in insufficient numbers to turn the tide, and were hamstrung by severe shortages of fuel and experienced pilots. The latter had been systematically lost in combat or destroyed in the chaos of retreat, further diminishing Germany's ability to capitalize on these advanced aircraft. When the final reckoning was made, it became clear that the overwhelming Allied advantage was responsible for the ultimate unraveling of German air power. American units operating across various theaters of the war conducted hundreds of thousands of fighter sorties, each one contributing to the attrition of the enemy's aerial and ground capabilities. These relentless efforts resulted in the destruction of approximately 4,950 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, while an additional 4,131 were knocked out on the ground, either in crashes, bombed airfields, or during strafing runs. These figures, while impressive, represent more than just the loss of metal and machine. They symbolize a devastating toll on German pilots, the erasure of valuable combat experience, and the destruction of industrial capacity that was dedicated to producing aircraft and related equipment. Ironically, a factor often overlooked, the supply of high-quality fuel, played a pivotal role in shaping these outcomes. The availability of approximately 150-grade fuel was not solely responsible for the Allied victory, but it was undeniably a crucial element in tipping the scales. This margin of superiority in aviation fuel quality and supply often turned what could have been a close contest into a decisive one. The American P-51 Mustangs, capable of reaching speeds of around 448 miles per hour when properly boosted, embodied more than just raw velocity. Their performance was a testament to technological advancement and industrial might, factors that German strategists had not fully anticipated. The ability of American scientists, engineers, and chemists, working far from the front lines, to develop fuels that provided engines with higher compression ratios, better anti-knock properties, and superior performance figures, effectively gave the Allies an intangible but decisive edge over their adversaries. The specialized gasoline, dyed purple to distinguish it from standard fuel, proved to be as impactful in aerial combat as superior tactics or the skill of well-trained pilots. It was a weapon in its own right, one that could significantly enhance the capabilities of piston engines, enabling them to operate at higher compression ratios and produce more power. This was a form of industrial and scientific dominance, an aspect of the war that largely went unnoticed by those fighting on the ground but proved crucial in the skies over Europe. The quality of aviation fuels, with performance metrics surpassing anything Germany could produce, became a defining factor in the final phase of aerial superiority in the European theater. The aircraft that once flew over Berlin in early 1944, the famous P-51 Mustangs, were already remarkable machines. But by early 1945, the same aircraft, powered by refined fuel with higher octane ratings, had become even more formidable, faster, more powerful, and more capable of accomplishing their missions with greater efficiency. This marked a clear difference resulting from technological and industrial innovation, from the design of the aircraft itself to the very fuel that fueled its engines. The distinctions between these planes, measured by octane number, manifold pressure, and airspeed, were not just technical details. They were decisive factors that influenced the ultimate outcome of the air war. In the grand calculus of victory, these differences in performance meant everything. The impressive achievements of the Allied forces in Europe, the collapse of Nazi Germany's military machine, and the eventual surrender of the Third Reich can all be traced back, in part, to this invisible yet vital element, fuel. It was a purple liquid, pumped into tanks, burned in powerful engines, and ultimately transformed into victory, one combat mission at a time. This was the silent yet irrefutable demonstration of Allied industrial might, an advanced chemical and technological triumph that, through the simple act of fueling aircraft, helped shape the course of history.